Welcome back to Understanding Iron Deficiency, a complete guide. So, today we're talking about sleep issues. These are very, very common with iron deficiency, and um, it baffles people because they will be tired all the time. And this might be you. You might be tired all day long, and then nighttime comes around and you can't sleep well. You don't fall asleep. It takes you a while to fall asleep. Or maybe you do fall asleep, but then you wake up shortly after, or you're waking up multiple times throughout the night. And it's like, what do? You're exhausted all the time and you're not sleeping well. And how do you fix that? You can't just will yourself to sleep more. Um, Another thing, this might happen too. It might be a mixture of both happening on and off. But sometimes you might sleep for 9, 10, even maybe more hours, but you wake up and you're still exhausted and you don't feel refreshed at all, right? Why is this happening? It's very common with iron deficiency, so don't feel like you're the only one. And it stems from, guess what? A lack of oxygen. Okay, so if you have a lack of oxygen, right? I'm gonna explain it simply right now, but your brain is monitoring how much oxygen is in your blood, among other things. And if your blood oxygen levels are chronically low, then that kind of sends a signal to your brain stem and to your brain to be to breathe more and to be stressed, to be anxious, to perhaps panic, right? Because if you're suffocating, you should, one, breathe more, two, panic, right? So you're unable to relax, and this kind of kicks you out of sleep because your body is too stressed, right? So this is why, even though you're tired because you're iron deficient, you also can't sleep because you're iron deficient, right? And that doesn't help. Um, why you sleep a lot but still feel exhausted? Well, in order to feel refreshed, your tissues need to be rejuvenated with getting the nourishment that they need. And part of that nourishment is oxygen. A lot of it is oxygen, right? Your cells need to reoxygenate themselves. They need a time of rest where they're not spending a lot of oxygen, so they can kind of make up for that oxygen that they've been spending throughout the day. And so they can kind of clear out any metabolic byproducts, and they need a lot of oxygen to do that, to produce the energy needed to recover, right? You actually need energy to recover, right? So there's that lack of oxygen, and you're constantly getting this suffocation alarm, right? It's literally just an alarm that your brain has whenever you're suffocating. And if you want to try it out, just hold your breath for 30 seconds, and you'll feel the alarm bells going off. Okay, and this brings me to my insight on nightmares and sleep paralysis. And I mean, I don't have to, you don't have to learn about this to understand iron deficiency, but I believe it's very important for understanding how mental health is largely a reflection of physical health. And right now, we're going to be talking about how our physical health shapes our dreams and our nightmares. And it's going to help us understand how it does that when we're awake as well. Okay, so a lot of people, they might have a nightmare and then they wake up and they're sweating and they might be panting, right, breathing heavily, and they're stressed. Their heart is beating really fast, and they might think to themselves, innocently enough, that, wow, that nightmare was so scary that I'm sweating. That nightmare was so scary that I'm gasping for air and my heart is racing. And that would be the exact wrong way of thinking of it, actually. It's totally understandable why you would think that, but it's just completely backwards. Uh, it does not start from the brain and then go to the body, right? Actually, what is happening is something stressful is happening in your body, right? That is causing the increase in ventilation. That is causing the release of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. That causes you to sweat. That causes your heart to race, right? All of this is starting from the body, and the mind, while you're sleeping, is kind of constantly paying attention to what's going on in the body. It's also influenced by these hormones, and the neural activity that's going on. And it is, you can think of your mind as a narrative making machine. It is constantly trying to come up with a narrative to explain what it is experiencing. And it, when you're awake, it is experiencing things from the outer world. It's also experiencing things from the inner world. And when you're sleeping, it is more obvious that you're more influenced by the inner world, because the outer world is, you're largely shut off from the outer world, right? When you're sleeping. So here's an example, right? One time I was, uh, I can remember exactly where I was. I remember it. I was at my friend's cottage, sleeping there, and I was having this dream, and it turned into a bit of a nightmare. And I was at the bottom of a pool, and I was lying on my back at the bottom of a pool, and I could see up to the top, and I could see, where the water was meeting the air, and I was, like 20 feet down there, and I just felt stuck there. I was paralyzed. And then I wake up, and I gasp for air, right? And thinking how one might think, you might think, wow, that dream was so powerful that because I was dreaming, I was at the bottom of a pool, I was holding my breath in real life. Amazing. Wow. How powerful is the mind? How powerful are dreams? Wow. And that's just exactly wrong. What was happening was I was lying on my back. I don't normally lie on my back. For whatever reason, I was lying on my back. And it's not very good to lie on your back when you sleep for this reason, because it tends to you're more likely to your throat muscles to relax, and it obstructs your breathing, and you experience sleep apnea, which is basically just a, a disruption of breathing while you're asleep. And because I wasn't breathing, my mind, while asleep and dreaming in REM sleep, I was trying to figure out, why aren't we breathing? Like, what are we doing here? Why are we holding our breath? Why is our blood oxygen level low? And it came up with a dream. It came up with the narrative that I was at the bottom of a pool, right? And then the stress of not breathing, my body getting that suffocation alarm and panicking, woke me up. And then I gasped for air and could start to relax, right? Okay, so we can look at sleep paralysis the same way. Now, sleep paralysis is a very interesting phenomenon, and if you're lucky, you've never experienced it, because it can be truly terrifying. It's brutal. Um, it typically happens. Uh, well, I'll explain what's going on in sleep paralysis. So, in sleep paralysis, what's happened is you were in REM sleep. And during REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, that is when you typically dream. That's dream sleep. During REM sleep, you're dreaming, and so that you don't act out your dreams and accidentally kick and punch in your sleep, uh, you your body basically cuts off motor signals to the rest of your body at the brainstem, right? So you're experiencing muscle atonia, which just means complete muscle paralysis of your body. So you're just lying perfectly still, and only your eyes are moving. Your eyes are flickering all over the place. That's why it's called rapid eye movement. Um, and then with sleep paralysis, something has happened where it's kicked you out of REM sleep into wakefulness, but the muscle atonia has not yet worn off. Okay? So you're dreaming, right? You're asleep, and then you're kicked out of REM sleep into wakefulness, and your mind is alert. You become aware of your surroundings, your eyes open up, right? But you can't move. You're paralyzed. And no matter how hard you try to move, you won't be able to move for a few seconds. And it feels like forever. Even though it might just be 5, 10 seconds, it feels like forever. Because you're in this kind of semi-conscious state. Uh, and another thing about sleep paralysis is there are common themes, and people tend to hallucinate. So it's called a hallucination over a dream. I think that's largely right. It makes sense because you're in a state of wakefulness, but you people tend to hallucinate things. And what they tend to hallucinate, there are two very common themes. They either tend to hallucinate that there is a dark presence in the room. You can see this person, They're lying down on the bed and there's a dark presence in the corner of the room. Another common theme is that there is a demon sitting on your chest, right? Something like this, right? An old pale woman is a common one as well. And and so these are very common themes, right? And you might already be thinking about why this happens physiologically, right? But we'll explain it, okay? So something that kicks you out of REM sleep into wakefulness, something stressful. What that typically is, right? You're more likely to have sleep paralysis dreams if you're experiencing stress in your normal life, right? Um, but the typical stress signal comes from that suffocation alarm, right? That suffocation alarm we talked about earlier. Okay. So sleep paralysis, you might not be surprised to realize that sleep paralysis almost always happens when the person is lying on their back. Okay. And again, when you're lying on your back, you're more likely to experience the sleep apnea and stop breathing. And then that stoppage of breathing, eventually your body has a panic alarm, right? You're suffocating, you're trying to breathe, but you can't. And so you start to panic, right? So now you're in this state of you're awake, but you can't move, you can't breathe, and your heart's racing, your stress is just through the roof, and your narrative making machine, your brain here, is trying to figure out what's going on. And what it does is it hallucinates that there is a dark, scary presence in the room to explain why you are so terrified. And you basically assume that I can't move because I'm so scared of that predator over there, right? Which is, there's part of the stress response, there's the fight, there's the flight, there's also the freeze. When you can't fight or flee, you freeze. And a lot of animals use this more, but this is part of human stress response to freeze as well. um and so you just kind of assume that you're freezing because there's this dark presence in the room, right? Another one is the demon sitting on your chest, right? That's a perfect explanation of why you're terrified, why you can't move because there's a demon sitting on your chest, and why you can't breathe because it's sitting on your chest, right? So I'll share a story of my worst sleep paralysis nightmare. Um, Basically, I was extra stressed. I just had an argument with this girl I was seeing, and we didn't resolve the argument. I came home, I went to bed, and then I was having this dream, right? And in the dream, she was there with me, right? Because you're not just dreaming about what your physiology is doing. You're also, your dreams are also influenced by the your daily life, right? What you're experiencing day to day. So she was in this dream, and then it was fine. But then all of a sudden, uh, the room that we were in turned dark, and there was a dark presence in the room. Now I was still dreaming at this point, right? And then I woke up, and it wasn't the dark presence in the room of the dream, but now I was in my room, and there was a dark presence at the doorway, right? And I was terrified, and my heart is just racing. I'm super scared. I can't move. I'm paralyzed, and I try to scream for help, but I can't because I have muscle atonia, right? It's totally cut off, right? It comes on to me, it's on my chest, right? And now it kind of transforms into this gargoyle like demon that's on my chest, and I try to scream for help, and I can't. I'm paralyzed. It like only a murmur comes out this time, right? And then it starts sucking out my soul, which is another common theme. It literally is just sucking out my soul, and I'm laughing, but it was truly one of the worst experiences of my life. It was terrifying. And I just felt it just completely invading my body. It was just this horrible feeling of vulnerability that I couldn't do anything about it. And my stress was through the roof. I was terrified. And then the third time I try and call out for help, and I manage it. I call out for help, help. I just barely call out for help, right? Before it was like, I can't do it. My muscles weren't working. Eventually, I call out for help, and then I sit up and I roll over and I start breathing for air. I'm like gasping, and I start to recover my breath, right? Because looking back, it's obvious I wasn't breathing, right? So what was going on there? Looking back, I was in the dream. The dream was going fine. It was just a normal dream. And then at some point, I must have had sleep apnea and stopped breathing. And then that's when the room turned dark in the dream, right? The stress of not breathing also kicked me out of REM sleep into wakefulness. And now, I wasn't dreaming, but the terror was still upon me, right? I still wasn't breathing. The panic alarm was still sounding in my brain, and so my mind was still trying to come up with an explanation of why I'm so terrified and why I'm not breathing and why I'm not moving. So it came up with those hallucinations. And then eventually the muscle atonia wore off and I was able to roll over, I was able to breathe again, and I was, slowly able to calm myself down. But I was still very scared until I could breathe again and catch my breath. And I'll also mention in the moments immediately following the when I regained muscle control, I immediately, instead of hallucinating a demon, I immediately attributed the um my sadness and terror to the fact that the girl I was seeing, she was there in the dream, but as soon as the dark presence came, she had abandoned me. And so I immediately thought, how terrible of her to abandon me. And now I say that because it's easy to think, oh, I'm anxious because, I was just abandoned, right? And that's, you know, that's right. That's real. That's real, right? I'm in real life now. That's real. She abandoned me. She didn't abandon me, but my real waking brain came up with that explanation, just like how my sleeping brain came up with the explanation of a dark presence in the room, just like how my sleep paralysis brain came up with the hallucination, the explanation that there was a dark presence in my room, that there was a demon sitting on my chest sucking out my soul. And then now, even though I was awake, even though I wasn't having a hallucination, I came up with this narrative that my girlfriend at the time had abandoned me. In all reality, she hadn't abandoned me, right? But there was this narrative in my head that was there because of my current physiological state, because I was panicked and I was feeling bad, and so I came up with an explanation for why I was feeling bad, right? And this is going on all the time. This is why I want to explain this, because this is why people with anxiety view the world as a terrible, threatening place, because they are trying to explain why they feel so vulnerable, why they feel so panicked, why they feel so anxious. They're trying to explain this, right? A lot of the times it's just their physiology. Their physiology has made them weak and vulnerable in some way. And so their mind has to come up with an explanation for it. It has to come up with a narrative, right? And yeah, so hopefully you found that interesting. And we're gonna hit this from so many different angles so that you completely understand how iron deficiency and how health and nutrition actually affects mental health, because it really does in many ways. And so we're gonna come at this with different angles, and you're gonna at by the end of it, you're gonna have a very holistic understanding of your mental health, right? Your mental health can certainly be affected by the outer world, the stresses of everyday life and relationships and all of that. But it can also be affected by your inner world, your physiology, your hormones, your neurotransmitters, your blood oxygen levels, right? And that's really important. That's what people don't talk about. And that's what I want to talk about. Okay. Um, yeah. So that one went on long because I shared more about my sleep paralysis dreams, but hopefully it was worth it. So if you thought it was worth it and that you liked me sharing that, let me know in the comments. Maybe share your sleep paralysis stories. Yeah, if you've never had sleep paralysis, you count yourself lucky. It's terrible. Anyway, up next, our next video will be about nausea and poor appetite. Okay, very common with iron deficiency to have nausea and poor appetite. That's what we'll be discussing. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video.